prior to the 1850s. Now, why does this matter? So I know that prior to 1850, you have the ticks and tallies, the U.S. ticks and tallies. So Amy, take it away. What is the problem prior to 1850 in the United States research?
Well, the federal census forms so much of our research. I mean, we have access most recently in 1940, 1930, 1920, we're getting really good information, right? We're seeing the head of household, we're seeing everybody in the household. Back until 1880, we're seeing relationships. They're actually spelled out on the document. Right. Love that.
Yes.
1850, 1860, 1870, we have everybody by name. Don't have the relationships listed, but we still have names, all right? And we're genealogists, we love names, right?
Yes, names are good.
Names
especially
are very good.
For women.
Yes.
Names are very good.
Yes, we love that. But the challenge before 1850 in the U.S. federal census is that the only name we have to work with is the head of household. And the entire household is represented on these, essentially on a ledger sheet with tick marks that are broken down by age and by gender. So like 1840, you can see, I believe it's like age groups like almost like every 5 years. So you can get fairly detailed. The further back you go, the wider those age spans become. So it's a little less specific.
Now, one thing with that is, particularly in the frontier towns, and we're talking frontier towns in the 1850s, is Missouri and Illinois. It's not the Wild West yet.
Right.
When you had boarding houses, it just has the owner of it, or whoever the head of it is. All the other people in that boarding house are just a tick mark.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you might have 23 men, between the ages of 20 and 25.
Right.
And the owner might be a female.
Judgment-free zone. Judgment-free zone. But you're exactly right. And that's the challenge. You have the challenge before 1850 with only the head of household listed. Well, what if the widowed mother is living there? Suddenly you have this random, 80-year-old female in the household. Well, is it his mother? Is it her mother? Who is that 80-year-old female?
Or is it an aunt or a great aunt?
Exactly.
And even the kids, they're kind of confusing because I've got cousins in the homes of their aunts and uncles, or just guardians. There's been a town where a lot of I think, this is my theory that I'm working on, a lot of the parents died. And so you have all these little orphans and guardians in different people's houses, and it just be confusing.
And we can hypothesize who those tick marks represent, and sometimes it's pretty clear, but oftentimes it isn't. So all of a sudden you move back before 1850 and you've lost a lot of the types of information that you were relying on in the federal census after 1850. So that becomes a real challenge for us, that we've essentially lost one of the bricks that we're using to build this foundation. So
for sure.
That's the challenge.
For sure. Okay, so your first record that you suggested that we look at is probate records. I might not be in the order you told us, but that's the one we have in our slides. Sorry.
That's all right. So, and I encourage people to look at probate rather than specifically wills.
Okay, tell us the difference.
Okay, so wills are a type of record within probate.
Okay.
The probate process is the process of taking someone's estate after they've died and distributing the assets, also paying off the debts. It's settling the estate. Now, if a person wrote a will, I was going to say if they wrote a will before they died, but of course that's when they wrote the will. It makes probate a lot easier if they wrote a will before they died. There's
for sure.
there's less judgment involved there. So, but if they wrote a will, then that person has decided who gets what. Okay, my widow will get the house and the land. It's hers until she dies or until she remarries. You see that fairly commonly. My oldest son, John, will get this. My other son, William, will get that. My daughter, Elizabeth, will get this other thing. And that's all well and good. We definitely want to take a look if our ancestor had a will. But sometimes a person died without a will, and that's called dying intestate. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're actually better off if your ancestor died without a will. And you're like, well, Amy, how does that benefit me if they didn't create this record?
Yeah, you're reading my mind.
Okay, so stay with me here. Okay. So when a person dies intestate, they don't have a valid will, their estate is divided up, is distributed according to the laws in place at that time in that location. So there are very specific ways that the estate is going to be distributed based on relationships.
Okay.
Okay. So when you're going through the probate, you can see these are all of the heirs. And I should back up half a step, because when somebody has a will, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have left something to all of their children. It's not uncommon for someone to not include a child if they were already married and they had already received land or a lump sum of money when they got married. Then they're not included in the will because they already received property. Okay, so that's pretty common. Whereas if the person dies intestate, those laws are going to say, okay, you have 5 children, they each get a fifth. So it doesn't matter what they might have already received from their parent. There's no will. Here's how it's going to be divided up. And what's cool about this, when you do have a situation where they die intestate, they're going to be listed often by relationship. And even sometimes when they aren't, when you're looking at what's called a final distribution, where they've taken all the debts, they've taken all the assets, they've divided everything up, right? And you can see exactly how much everybody's receiving. Oftentimes, there will be a situation where one of the children had already died, but before they died, they had 2 children. So now you have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. Well, those 2 grandchildren, again, depending on the laws in that place at that time, those 2 grandchildren might inherit. Mm-hmm. So if, let's say we originally had 5 children, so this one's getting a fifth and a fifth and a fifth and a fifth, but then that one had died, these 2 grandchildren are splitting a fifth. So when you see these heirs, and remember, heirs doesn't necessarily mean children, when you see these heirs, they're not getting a full share. Okay, what's their relationship? Why is it that these 2 people over here are apparently splitting what should have been a full share? Gotcha. So that's when you can start to really reconstruct the family.
So with probate, when somebody died, and they're going through basically all their belongings, all their land and stuff, they come up with some value. So how does that actually though then get distributed? Because like you have a farm. If you want to distribute it between 7 people, then you basically got to sell the farm, right?
Well, what they would do, oftentimes you would have some sort of farm sale. You would have an auction where some of the things are getting sold off. Now, here's something else to consider. Let's say that that the person who died owned land. Well, now all of the heirs own that land.
Jointly.
Mm-hmm. So
that could be a problem if you want to sell and everybody else doesn't.
It's a problem for them, but it's a benefit for us because it creates more records. And I think that this is actually the second thing we talk about is land records.
I think so. Let me see. Yep.
And the cool thing about the land records, and this can tie in sometimes with probate, like you say, when you have someone who died owning land, those heirs, one of them can't just sell it because it's owned jointly. Right. So in order to do anything with that property, in many locations, what they had to do was basically file a special suit, often called a partition suit. And this partition suit basically would be where all of the heirs are being sued in order to sell the land. I'm not explaining the legalities of it, but let's just say it's a really cool record.
So that's one of the heirs is suing all the other heirs.
Yeah, or sometimes you'll see the administrator of the estate suing the heirs.
And tell me this is a good thing? It's not just always a battle? It's just trying to... Because I'll see it in a newspaper, I'm like, gosh, that family just keeps fighting.
Yeah, no, it's not that they're fighting. It's the legal process that they had to go through in order to clear title to the land.
Got it.
Right. So it isn't always a battle. Sometimes it's just the bureaucracy of the whole thing. So we can use that to our advantage. What's cool about when you're going through these partition suits is a lot of them will list where the heirs lived. So if you have a family who's scattered, suddenly we can see, this, let's say that the deceased was in Perry County, Ohio. Oh, but the heirs are in Jay County, Indiana. They're in Grundy County, Missouri. They're in, St. Louis County, Missouri. They're in Bexar County, Texas. So you can see where the different heirs have gone. You can pick up the daughters with their married names. Perfect. Love that.
Perfect. Yeah, for sure.
Which is awesome. So using those probate records in conjunction with the land records and sometimes, other types of court records, because probate is usually a court type of record. We don't think of it that way, but using it in conjunction with these other types of court records, like a probate or a partition suit, we can really start to reconstruct these families.
Right. And I also have loved land records because the husband and wife to inherit, both of them have to sign off on it, and you can pick up the names of the females when usually they're kind of hidden in things. That's, Hannah Moore signed off on this thing. They'll have the main little land sale, and then they'll have this addendum, I guess you would call it. I don't know what to call it, but I call it an addendum. This extra little thing, the formality where it says she came in and of her own free will. She said, I'm okay with the sale, and here's her name, and here's her ex.
Well, just so everyone knows, Melissa Barker just joined us, and she was late. She says, I was helping a patron in the Houston County, Tennessee archives with what else? Land records.
And she also says, Amy's the bomb. Totally agree.
Oh, thanks. That's sweet.
Don't you just have like a big head?
I do.
But you don't have a big head. It just makes you feel good, doesn't it?
It does make me feel good.
That's
so,
what we're talking about.
But what you were talking about in the deed, what you were calling an addendum, that's called a release of dower. Doesn't that sound very official? It's a release of dower. And what it is, a woman's dower rights, not to be confused with a dowry, what a woman brings into a marriage, but her dower rights were the rights that a wife had to property. So what they would do, because if she does not release her dower rights, the person buying that land technically doesn't have free and clear title to it. And if you want to do anything with land, you really do need to have free and clear title. Right. So that's why you have that little extra section at the end of a lot of deeds where it says that, Melissa Smith was, that she was interviewed separate and apart from her husband, and she agrees to release her dower, which is awesome because it's proving that she was alive when the sale happened. Okay. It's giving us at least her first name. So yeah, definitely when you're looking at a deed and when you're looking at any record that's really long, I know it's tedious and I know that they're not the most exciting records because there's a lot of legalese in there, but you really do need to go through the whole thing. Another thing that I really, really like about land records is that they list, generally speaking, okay, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, land records will list where the grantor, the seller, and the grantee, the buyer, where they're living.
That's right, they do.
Yeah, and that's important because you don't have to be living where your land is. And so anything that we can do to pull out clues like that, and this is especially important in the eastern United States before 1850, because you've got a lot of Western migration happening then.
Mm-hmm.
So as you have people leaving the eastern seaboard and they're moving across what is now the United States, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're moving across. A lot of those people were taking advantage of even what was then the American dream of buying low, selling high.
Absolutely.
and the way to do that in a lot of cases was through land.
Yeah, I remember actually one of my ancestors in New York, when I was looking at some land records, he had originally bought this parcel. And it was probably only like 5-10 acres. It wasn't that big of a parcel, and he paid $1,000 for it. And 6 months later, he sold half of it for $750. So when you do the math there, it's like, hey, if he sells this other one for another $750, then he's made money. He actually sold that other half 3 years later before he moved out to California for $2,000. So
wow.
he like tripled his money on
That's a pretty good rate of return
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
on nice land speculation there.
Yeah, and we
For
do
sure.
and we do see a lot of our ancestors, especially the closer to that frontier. You do see more and more land speculation. You know, it's opening up. The land is cheap. A lot of times, before people moved on to it, you know, we were a very agrarian society. Well, to make the land, quote, worth anything, and I am using air quotes there, to make it worth anything, you had to clear the land. You know, you had to chop down the trees, you had to turn the soil, and you had to do all this, that, and the other thing to make that land suitable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's really kind of hard to farm in the middle of a forest. So, you need some sunlight at some point. You know. So, but that was something that people took into account. So the land, and you also had the federal government. Suddenly, they've got millions of acres. Mm-hmm. So they've got this great asset in land. The federal government needed cash.
Right.
So they're selling it pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm. When you look at it, it's really like pennies per acre. I mean, you had to buy, lots of 40 or 60 or 100 acres or 600 acres or something. But when you're paying $500 for 600 acres,
right.
It's like, oh, that's pretty cheap.
Right. And so what you would have, especially again, and we're still focusing pre-1850, that you would have a lot of people doing land speculation, and they never lived on the land. Mm-hmm. But those deeds are still going to show where they lived.
Right, for sure.
So anytime that you can get into land records, there are so many clues that you can pull out. Besides the residences, you're usually going to find the name of the wife of the grantor, again, because she's going to have to release her dower rights. The wife of the grantee, almost never.
Right.
You almost never see the name of the wife of the person buying the land, because she wasn't legally involved in it at that point.
So let me ask one thing with land records, and going back to speculating, if you have your ancestors that are living over on the eastern side of the United States, how or what clues would you have that they were speculating in land that you'd know to go and start looking in places like Missouri or Kansas or something for your ancestors that never lived there?
Well, a lot of times you're not going to find it unless they died owning it.
Okay. So then you go back to the probate.
You go back to the probate. And I have a situation like that in my family. Don't know if it was necessarily land speculation, because it was Ohio into Indiana. He died in May of 1850. He shows up on that 1850 mortality schedule, which is awesome. Thank you for, and he died in late May. If he would have died in June, he would have been on the federal census,
Right.
but I wouldn't have a death record for him.
Right.
So, but going through his probate, I found that he owned land at the time he died in White County, Indiana. I probably would not have known that if he hadn't have died suddenly, in May of 1850. So sometimes you're not going to find those, but you can also take clues about, where is the migration going from this particular part of the state? Looking at the migration pattern coming out of Perry County, Ohio, they all went up into Northwest Ohio and across into Indiana. So looking at a migration pattern, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. So that's probate. You just gave us a bonus tip. Probate, land, and overlay migration pattern. There you go. There you go. Synergy.
And that's something too that we do need to think about moving before 1850. It's like, okay, when we're in let's say a time period that's a little bit more robust in how many records we have to deal with, like you get into the late 1800s and, suddenly you have almost an embarrassment of riches in terms of the types of records. Sometimes you tend to skip them because, I've already got the answers. I don't need to delve into land records. I don't need to delve into voter records or tax records or anything like that. You get before 1850, and especially when you're working on an area that's a little bit more frontier, you don't have the luxury of saying, I don't feel like working in land records. I don't feel like working in tax records. You need to, if you want to find the answers, you're going to have to, overcome that reticence of digging into different record types, because sometimes you just have to work with what you got.
Right. Well, when we interviewed Amy Carpenter about researching in the U.S. South, and we also talked to Sherry Passy about researching slaveholding ancestors, and both of them said you can't really research the South unless you have land records, and in any time period, really. But land records, like you said, you could find some other really cool things, but land records, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, they seem to suggest that's also where you're going to find although it seems odd, the transfer of the slaves, because they were considered property too.
They were considered property, and you definitely see that. Although we think of deeds as being land records, you can have deeds for other types of property, and you do see that. And if you're working in the American South, you're going to see enslaved persons in probate. Yeah. Because that, they were considered assets of the deceased. So you are going to see enslaved persons listed, maybe not individually, although sometimes you do, but you might see them listed in aggregate. Right. You might see, all of my slaves go to my oldest son. You might see something like that.
Very good.
What about businesses?
Oh, yeah, true.
Not just from the land side, but also, from the probate side. How do you see those in the records?
That's an interesting question. I think I'm going to sound like Judy Russell. It depends.
Well, that's every genealogist, right? It depends. Right. Time, location, and record availability.
Well, yeah, it's that. And in terms of business, it would also depend upon how legally binding that business was. Had they gone through the steps of forming a legal partnership, not just, hey, how about the two of us open a show or open a store? Let's put on a show. Channeling Judy Garland right there. I don't know what happened. So if they had something where they had actually formed a legal entity, then something like that probably would show up either in probate or in some related court records of, now that one of the persons in that entity is gone, what do you need to do? So I think it's going to depend. If it's just hey, I have the land that has a good running stream going through it, and you have the capital to build a sawmill, let's partner together. Just kind of a friendly, we're just going to do this on a handshake, then you may not see something formal in the probate process. It's just going to depend.
So what would happen then when, let's say, the landowner dies? What would happen to the sawmill? Like that land goes to his son or his wife, or maybe the grandchildren who didn't necessarily even know there was a sawmill or anything like that.
again, I think it's going to depend upon how legally binding that arrangement was. Had they made any provisions of, okay, when I die or if I die, then this is what's going to happen to
that's where a
these
will would
business.
come in really handy.
A will would come in very handy.
Really handy.
Or if they had some sort of contractual agreement of here's exactly what each of us is bringing into this business, and when it's time to dissolve it, either by desire or by death, here's how it's going to be dissolved. Did they have some sort of contract? And if not, that's when you're going to start seeing some lawsuits.
Well, would those contracts be as part of the legal record somewhere, or are those just more private contracts between the two people?
Those would tend to be more private contracts between the two people. There wouldn't be really any reason to file anything unless they were filing like articles of incorporation, which that would be something that they would file with the state.
So something like that would be something, going back to Melissa, is you find it in the archives. If you were like looking through, one of the long folders or whatever they call them, and hey, you come across this contract thing. Oh, he was in business with this other person on the handshake agreement type of thing.
Plug for those archives. Always, Melissa reminds us to plug for those archives.
that can always turn up in family papers. So you just never know where those are going to pop up.
Okay. Now, before we go to tip 3, for those of you who are in chat and who are watching the live stream, if you enjoyed this interview, could you go and hit the thumbs up button on this video? Because that will tell YouTube that everybody loves Amy. Because we like Amy, right? And then if you really, really enjoy this video, be sure you share it out, because this is valuable information you want to make sure that other people are listening to. I also wanted to welcome, I see Patricia, she is like our family history fanatic fan. She watches like every video. I love Patricia. Hi, Patricia. And Jarrett is in the house in Cosmic Slice. Good to see you there. All right, so now we're going to go to tip number 3. And you said census records? We're going to look for census records pre-1850? I'm confused.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago, that you can't afford to just skip records. You can't afford to say, well, I already know what's going to be in that record. I'm not going to look. I already know that there's nothing, again, getting out the air quotes, there's nothing in the census before 1850. Okay, come on, let's be real. It's a record. We need to look at it, even if it does only have one name.
Right, for sure.
Because even though that household only has one name, there's still a lot of information that we can pull out of it. So we can see that household. We have the head of household, who, remember, may not be the oldest person in the household, but you have the head of household, but everyone in there is somehow represented by age and by gender. So you can go through and see, okay, there are 3 males under the age of 10. There are 2 females who are teenagers. There's a woman who is 30 to 35, and there's a male who's 35 to 40. All right. Take that information and compare it to what you know about the family. Do those genders, do those ages fit what you know? So, kind of confirm that, yes, this family, this household that I'm seeing in 1840, for example, okay, yeah, that does match what I know about my family after, what I've discovered for them 1850 and later. So it in using it that way becomes sort of your sanity check of, yeah, well, talking about sanity, but it's good to make sure that really is the family and not another household that has somebody with the same name. And you think, well, okay, well, what did that really tell me? Well, it actually tells you a lot once you confirm that is the family that you're looking for, because that puts another point on that timeline. The more points on a timeline that you can put your ancestor, and you can put them in at a time, in a place, ideally doing something, but I'll take 2 out of 3 in this case.
Yeah.
You have them in a place at a time. that's like another point on their fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
And the more points you can get on that fingerprint, the clearer the picture of that ancestor is going to be. So even if that's all you're doing is just confirming that, yes, this is the family, and yes, they are in this township at that time, okay, you've got them better identified.
Right.
But
So,
there are also...
I have a question.
Sorry. Sure.
So maybe you're leading into this, but are there territory and state census records prior to 1850? I believe there was something for California right around the gold rush, but I'm not sure.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And you also, I mean, besides territorial and state censuses that might exist, there are also in some locations even a local census.
Oh.
Now these local censuses might not cover everyone. Mm-hmm. They might just cover landowners. They might just cover, and this one's really common, they might just cover males age 21 and up. And the reason for that is they're looking at if this county needs to call up a militia, mm-hmm. what is their potential strength?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you see these you see these local censuses, but again, you have to be very careful who it is that you're looking for. Is it just landowners? Is it just men over 21? Is it just white men over 21? Mm-hmm. Is it just citizens?
White men landowners over 21.
White men landowners, who happen to be citizens over the age of 21. Yeah, so you do need to do a little bit of research, because if you're going into this thinking that it's all the males in this county, but it's actually only the white males over 21, you could end up skewing your conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you don't realize exactly what that record is telling you.
For sure.
Yeah.
So is there, since I've never stumbled across local census records for Franklin County, Ohio, do you find them happening more in certain regions, or is it just hit or miss?
It's kind of hit or miss, although I think for Franklin County, Ohio, there might be. I would check at the Ohio History Connection.
Okay.
Ohio had and these go back even into the 1830s, what they called, brace yourself for this one, quadrennial enumerations.
Oh.
Why?
Quadrennial. I know how to spell sesquicentennial, but I don't know how to spell quadrennial.
Oh, quadrennial is spelled just like it sounds.
Okay.
But if you think about the word quadrennial, once every 4 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, it was something that the state of Ohio allowed the counties to do, but didn't require the counties to do. So some counties took them. I know some counties took them every 4 years. Some didn't, and whether or not all those schedules survived is, of course, a whole other matter. But counties in Ohio, even back into the 1830s, and they did this, I've seen them into the early, into 1903, okay? And who they were covering varied, but in some counties, you do have, at least for a time period, a little local census every 4 years.
And those, I'm guessing, are at the archive.
The archive. Now, whether it's at the county archive or whether it's at one of the regional archives in Ohio, that depends. Mm-hmm. But you see similar things in other counties or in other states. Again, where people are taking a local census. It could be a local census of school-age children. Mm-hmm. Again,
yes, I love those.
Those are great. As public education is becoming more common, these censuses were a way for the government, whether it's a local government or a state government, to sort of assess what the needs are, and for budgeting, for planning, for, oh my gosh, there are a lot more kids than what we had realized. So
something in the water.
Something in the water here. But you do see these
real quick, I just got to interject there, since we're talking about kids and something in the water. I read a news story today about this little town in Poland that for the last 15 years or something, all they've had is girls.
Ooh.
Now, it's a small town, so they've only had 12 girls.
that's
in that
still
time.
crazy.
But still.
That's still,
Yeah. Imagine your little town. Hey, we're not having any more boys. It's just little girls. So.
Well, when they age up, those guys are gonna have to.
There better be another town that has all these guys that are being born.
Yeah. Wow. That'll change a migration pattern for you for sure. Oh, I love talking to you guys.
Oh my goodness. Well, those are some really great tips. If you are in the chat right now and you have any questions for Amy on any topic, she's so well versed on anything, go ahead and drop those in the questions. We're going to stay away from DNA because, then just Andy's going to talk and we're just going to sit here bored. You'll have to hold that for the next live stream. But if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat right now. But so Amy,
let me interject here real quick with going back to the census list. One of the things that I do now, this only works for kids that were born like right before a census, because if you get them when they're like 1, maybe 2 years old, and then the next census they're going to be 12, and the next census there might be 22, they might still be living all in the same house. So if you come across a family with the same head of house, that you see this tick mark progressing up each one of those times, that's a good hint now, because now you have like 3 points that you can actually assign the name to that tick mark as opposed to just a general thing. Now, the problem comes in is when people would have kids every 2 years because the census only has, every 5 or 10 years. And so you have lots of numbers there. And
then they have the overlap.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that one where there's actually an overlap.
But I have done that with the census where it's like, hey, you take a family and you can actually assign names to a couple of them because they always show up there.
Yeah, definitely. And one other way, before we get into Q&A, one other way to also use those pre-1850 censuses is to not only look at that one household, but take a look at the households before, the households after. Get a sense of the neighborhood, because that becomes your fan club, your friends, your associates, your neighbors, literally the neighbors.
Now because I know that in some, maybe this was all the way back to 1790 and 1800, some of the towns alphabetized their lists, in which case it doesn't work good.
Yeah,
but if you're looking...
it doesn't work as well. I mean, it's obviously much harder, if impossible, to recreate the neighborhood.
Right.
But you can see the other households at least in that name.
Right.
Or, in that letter. So, if you're researching Skinners, but you're also seeing Seacrest, you're also seeing Swartz, you're also seeing some of those other S surnames in that same township. So yeah, you're not getting quite the benefit when they alphabetized the list and they thought they were being helpful. But you can still pull out some clues.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's just a little harder.
Yeah. It's harder when all the last names are Brown.
Yeah. Smith, Miller, Johnson.
Yeah.
It's fun.
There you go. Yeah. And Crow and Smith.
Yeah.
We could just have like a competition of the most common names we have.
Common names, yeah.
Okay.
There's been no questions.
There's been no questions. You've just blown everybody away so much. So if you enjoyed Amy Johnson Crow, I want you to take a minute and I want you to go ahead and say thank you, Amy, in the chat, or Amy rocks, or this is the best live stream ever, something like that, just so we know that you're alive and well and you haven't killed over. Because we might have to call 911 on some of you guys there. But anyway, so Amy, tell me, what do you have going on? Like, so you have your podcast. What else is going on?
I've got the podcast, got the website at amyjohnsoncrow.com, where you can both listen to the podcast and you can see all the show notes with the links I talk about and everything. I have a online membership called the Generations Cafe Circle. Inside the circle, we have classes, go at your own pace. So it's taking a deeper dive than what I can really cover in the podcast. But, we're talking about things like evaluating evidence, finding records. I'm getting ready to, I'm putting the finishing touches on a new class on citing sources. So you can cite your sources without absolutely stressing out about it. So, yeah. So
I listened to that podcast, by the way. You did a good job with that episode.
Thank you. Yeah, cite what you see. Cite what you see.
Yeah, for sure. And then, are you going to Roots Tech 2020?
I am going to Roots Tech 2020. I'm doing two classes. One is telling your family history in bite-sized pieces, which was,
I know about that class. That's really good. The reason why I say whom, for some of those you don't know, Amy was part of our writing e-conference, and this is probably very similar to that class, and she did a fantastic job, so you want to check that one out.
Very similar to that class. The other class that I'm giving, I am blanking on right now. Totally blanking on what the
really
other class
important
is.
class, though.
It is. Oh, I know. It's taking your blog from blah to beautiful.
Oh, that's right. I did see you announce that.
So a little bit more writing there, and that one's also going to be not only for hobbyist bloggers, but also giving tips for anybody who is blogging professionally. You know, that they're a professional genealogist and they want to ramp up their blogging game, societies, anything like that. And then I'm also going to be on a panel with Drew Smith, Lisa Louise Cook, Scott Fisher, and David Allen Lambert, and we're going to talk about podcasting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Those are all really good people to talk about that topic.
So we do have one question for you here.
Yeah.
This is from Stacy. She says, not so much pre-1850, but I am trying to find a William Gardner who married in 1867. Cannot find the family in 1870 and in 1880. He is not with his wife and now 5 kids. What can I do to find him? So the wife and 5 kids are in 1880, but he doesn't appear there, and it doesn't look like he's there in 1870 either. What tips would you give to Stacy to help her with that?
I would start where the widow and kids are living in 1880 and look in probate records. Because if he died and he owned any property at all, or he had a bunch of debts, there's going to have to be some sort of settlement of his estate. You know, how are we? Because even though everything should go to the wife and kids, it still has to be probated, right? And hopefully he owned land, because that's going to create more records. So that's actually where I would start. Going along with that, I would also dig into the court records, whether it's part of probate or whether it's something different in a different court. I don't know what state we're talking about, but are there any guardianship records? Because even though the mother is still alive, women really didn't have a whole lot of legal rights. So if the children are inheriting anything, or, you know, including land, they're too young to act as their own person in court, you know, to represent their own interests. Well, mom, being female, she doesn't have a whole lot of legal rights on her own. Therefore, she often couldn't represent her own children. You could still have a guardian situation. So I would also look at those guardianship records and I would start in the county where they're living in 1880.
Okay, so here's some more information for you, and you're going to like this.
Okay.
First off, this is Monroe County in Ohio. And...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh!
Maybe that's bad then.
It is kind of bad.
So, and then here's the other bit of information. She is listed as married in the 1880 census. So that usually indicates that her husband's not dead.
And she hasn't found a death certificate.
So tell us, why is Monroe County bad for Stacy?
They had some record loss. They really did have a courthouse fire. I don't remember what time period. You might actually be after the fire, so that would be good. If she's listed as married in 1880, what about 1900?
Now, did Ohio have the 5-year censuses?
No, we didn't. We didn't have a state. We didn't have a statewide census, unfortunately.
Would it also be possible that she's divorced and on the census record says she was married?
Oh, that's totally possible, because in that time period, you don't know who talked to the enumerator, and you don't know how truthful they're being. You know, and if he just abandoned the family, well, you know, is she going to say, well, you know, he left? Well, even if he left and she hasn't formally divorced him, she hasn't had him declared dead, she's still technically married.
Okay, so here's even more. Stacy's just adding to this story. So they married right before the fire. So I guess the fire was like 1867 time frame.
Okay.
But she remarried in 1882. So we have a second marriage for her. We can't find him in 1880 or in 1870, but they had 5 kids between 1867 and 1880.
I would still be looking at probate. I would be looking at land records.
What about just legal records in general? See if he got sent to the state penitentiary or something like that.
Yeah, you never. Well, that's. Yeah, have you looked in the state pen, which would be in Franklin County? Have you looked for him there in 1880? You never know. Do we know, could he have served in the Civil War? And if so, is there a Civil War pension?
Oh.
You know, is that a possibility? Have you looked there? But I would start with court records, start with land records, and see. Also thinking about, are there guardianship records for any of those children, even though she's still living in 1880
Okay.
and remarried in 82? Yeah, that's where I would start looking.
There you go, Stacy. There you go. She likes Ohio, even though she likes that school that I don't like.
It's all right. Okay.
And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, she's a Ohio State University Buckeye fan.
Well, I graduated from there.
I know you did.
Although I have to say I went to a branch campus. I didn't go to main campus because it's too big.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is huge.
I had to go get my picture by the Buckeye guy. I don't know his name.
Brutus.
See.
I
was born there,
and he knows.
So, yeah. I've been disowned by my family because I want to cheer for Wolverines.
Devin.
But when I go teach in Ohio, I make sure I keep that on the down low. I just play it. I'm an Aggie. It doesn't matter. You guys can have it out.
Okay.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed having you here. If you have any more questions for Amy Johnson Crow, you can put them in the comments of the description after the broadcast ends. And be sure to hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. Share it out on social, because there's people who are like, hey, I can't attend live. Let them know that the replay is happening, because this was great information. And if you have detailed information questions like Stacy had, make sure you contact Amy at amyjohnsoncrow.com, or pretty much on Facebook. Smack. Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. She's
all
everywhere.
the socials.
All social. Amy Johnson Crow. I mean, that's all you need to know. AJC.
Okay, so our next live stream is going to be on September 6th. We're going to be talking about downsizing and the new book that we wrote. Yes. And that is actually also going to be at a new time. Yes. We're going to be at 11 a.m. Central, which is 6 p.m. Sweden time.
Stacy, I'm hoping that works for you, so you don't have to run off and go pick up your kids.
And 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, it's all for Stacy. No, just kidding. What happened is, so we are homeschooling my kids, and our Friday co-op kind of doesn't happen anymore. So we're going to try out the 11 o'clock time, see if you guys like it. If you do, great. If not, we'll go back. But join us on September 6th for Downsizing with Family History in Mind. Think ahead now what kind of questions you have, like, hey, should I keep this? Should I not keep this? Where should it go if it's valuable but I don't want to keep it anymore? Bring all of those questions on September 6th. Bye, guys.
See y'all later.